A very warm welcome to the launch of ICare, the International Classification for Alternative Care of Children. This is really a milestone in ensuring the rights and protection of children in alternative care. My name is Rachel Harvey, Senior Advisor for Child Protection and Migration, and the lead for Violence Prevention and Response Solutions. For those of you needing language interpretation, you'll find French and Russian options at the bottom. Today, we're going to hear about ICare and from a distinguished panel from government and NGOs on how ICare can be used in and enhance their work. There's also going to be time for reflections and Q&A, so please do put your questions and reflections in the chat or the Q&A function. And with that, I would like to first turn to Shima Sengupta, the Director for Child Protection and Migration of the Centres of Excellence, for the opening remarks. Over to you, Shima.
Thank you, Rachel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues, distinguished representatives of governments, national statistical officers, UN agencies, civil society organizations, academia, and partners. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you to this launch of the International Classification of Alternative Care of Children. In short, ICare. For too long, as we all know, children in alternative care have remained largely invisible in official statistics. While many countries collect data, they often use different definitions, different classifications, and reporting systems, making it difficult to compare information, to track trends, or assess whether policies are truly improving children's lives. As we often say, what is not counted is often not prioritized, and what is not measured cannot be effectively improved. Today, with the official launch of ICare, we begin to change that together. The United Nations Statistical Commission approved ICare in March 2026 as an official international statistical standard. This was a landmark achievement for the child protection and childcare reform community and for the millions of children growing up without parental care, particularly those placed in various alternative care settings. For the first time, countries and the international community have a globally agreed framework for defining and classifying alternative care arrangements in a consistent, comparable way. The launch of ICare today provides a common way to identify children in alternative care, understand their needs, improve their lives, and support their reintegration into the care of their families or family-based or community-based alternative care. ICare concepts and definitions are grounded in international standards on children without parental care and the alternative care of children, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the UN Guidelines for the Alternative Care of Children, and the 2019 UN General Assembly Resolution on the Rights of the Child, with a focus on children without parental care. But ICare is more than a statistical classification. It is a tool for better policies and better decisions. It can help support the prevention of family separation, prioritize family-based alternative care when alternative care is necessary, and contribute to ending institutionalization. Reliable and comparable data help governments understand who the children in alternative care are, why they enter care, what types of care they receive, and how systems evolve over time. This evidence supports better planning, more equitable resource allocation, stronger accountability, and more effective monitoring of care reform. Importantly, it helps governments strengthen child protection systems that place children's rights and best interests at the center of every decision. For UNICEF, This is closely tied to our broader vision for care reform to prevent unnecessary family separation, to prioritize family-based alternative care when alternative care is necessary, and to progressively end the institutionalization of children. Decades of evidence show that children thrive best in nurturing family environments, while residential care can have profound lifelong consequences for their development and well-being. Better data will help countries monitor progress towards these goals, strengthen the capacity of families and parents to care for their children, and support the transition of children from residential care to family and community-based care. ICare also matters because it reflects the diversity and the complexity of children's experiences. It offers a common language across countries while respecting the different national systems, and it can support administrative data, household surveys, and population census alike. Importantly, it strengthens the visibility of children who have far too often been overlooked, including children with disabilities, children in humanitarian settings, and unaccompanied and separated children, among others who require tailored protection responses. This achievement of ICare reflects truly a collaborative process. UNICEF had the privilege of leading this work together with nearly 100 experts. And I want to express UNICEF's sincere appreciation to everyone who contributed to this achievement. Our colleagues across UNICEF, particularly colleagues from data and analytics and from the child protection and migration practice in the Center of Excellence, and the country offices, national statistical offices and government partners, the United Nations Statistics Division, members of the UN Committee of Experts on International Statistical Classifications, civil society organizations, academic experts, and the donors whose commitment and technical expertise made this possible. Their collective expertise ensured that ICare is both technically rigorous and practically relevant for countries. And of course, today's launch is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. The real impact of ICare will come through implementation. And UNICEF looks forward to working alongside governments, alongside national statistical offices, regional organizations, and partners to help countries adapt their information systems, strengthen national capacities, and use these data to inform policy and improve outcomes for children. Successful implementation will require sustained investment, national capacity building, and continued collaboration. Let us use this launch and this momentum to ensure that every child without parental care and every child placed in alternative care is counted, understood, and visible, because better data leads to better decisions. Better decisions build stronger child protection and care systems, and stronger systems mean better lives for every child. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shima. We've heard about how significant the launch of ICare is for governments, for practitioners, and most importantly, children themselves. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Claudia Kappa, Senior Advisor for Statistics and Monitoring and Chief of Child Protection Development Data Unit, who really spearheaded this initiative. And she will take us through the tool and its implementation. Over to you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let me go straight at the core of the presentation by asking, why did we need a statistical classification? And what is it, a statistical classification? Because, of course, work aimed at protecting children, work aimed at offering children alternative care has been going on for a very long time. Many partners before us in this endeavor have worked towards improving the availability and quality of data on children in residential care facility as well as children throughout the different aspects of the system that require monitoring and data. But why did UNICEF feel compelled and responded to this need of developing a statistical classification? Because it is true that while most countries have at some point collected data on the population of children and their different care arrangements, most countries collected data in a way that has been fragmented across sectors and certainly not comparable. Definitions and counting units that have been used by countries in the monitoring of the population of children in alternative care have differed significantly. And what we are concerned about is not just international comparability. Of course, international comparability has its value and it's important, but it's also at the national level that we saw that many countries within the countries across the different actors working in this field use different definitions and counting units, affecting comparability and also harmonization of statistics. The absence of standardized data collection tools and approaches limit effective efforts aimed at care reform. Now, if we are concerned also about international level monitoring, we know that global accountability and international monitoring requires harmonized, internationally comparable statistics. So, what is the ICare? The ICare is the first ever international statistical classification that has been developed and endorsed by the United Nations Statistical Commission and regulates the field of statistics and data production when it comes to children in alternative care. It provides a framework for harmonizing definitions across sectors and countries and ensuring global comparability of statistics on alternative care of children. It enables disaggregation by child, caregivers, setup, and management and facilities of care arrangements. And by doing so, the ICare supports development, implementation, monitoring, evaluation of evidence-based national policies and programs. Who is this document intended for? Who will find the ICare useful? Obviously, ministries, national statistical offices, social services and child protection agencies, healthcare system, education institutions, law enforcement and justice systems, international organizations, and overall policymakers. And it's really important that we acknowledge that the international classification of alternative care of children is not just a tool that is intended for national statistical offices. And this for many reasons. First and foremost, because the production of data on care arrangements for children is not the sole responsibility of national statistical offices. Actually, when it comes to alternative care arrangements for children, the main data producers tend not to be national statistical offices, are actually ministry and service providers, those who are responsible for regulating care arrangements, those who are responsible, for instance, for residential care facilities. So it's not necessarily the National Statistical Office in a country. Obviously, national statistical offices still have a very important role to play. In many countries, national statistical authorities, in addition to developing their own data collection efforts, they also coordinate the production of official data, official statistics. So, and therefore, they also have this convening, quality assurance, and data governance role. But again, it's important that we recognize that when it comes to alternative care of children, most of the data come from administrative records and are linked to the provision of services for the population of children in alternative care. But it's also important that we acknowledge and we understand that the ICare speaks to the need of these multiple stakeholders because it's not just for the purpose of counting. The motivation behind the ICare is counting, but also the ICare can help with the harmonizations of definitions that are far-reaching implications besides the production of statistics. Now, how was the ICare developed? What was the process? And it has been mentioned by Shima before me. This was a very comprehensive and consultative process that lasted approximately 2 years. We were able to manage this process within 2 years and not a longer time frame because many stakeholders before us had helped with laying the foundations that are the backbone of a statistical classification, including those who were behind the development of the alternative care guidelines. So we started in May, October 2024, acknowledging the lack of clarity when it comes to definitions and counting units. UNICEF decided to bring together a group of experts to draft a very first draft of the classification. We created a task force that helped us draft the classification. Then this first draft was reviewed by a reference group we created involving a larger set of stakeholders coming from the academic world, but also practitioners, members of civil society, members of national statistical authorities. We had a broad online expert consultation that follow with 30 child protection and child care experts, took place in 2025, followed by a country consultation process that involved directly representative of national statistical offices and line ministries from over 40 countries and regional statistical organizations. This online global consultation took place over 2 months in 2025. We then conducted a pilot of the ICare. We actually shared the ICare with a number of countries. We organized a workshop and we asked countries, try using the ICare to evaluate your systems, to evaluate the way you record information about children in alternative care. And let us know if the ICare is relevant to you and is useful for understanding how your system relates to an international standard, and it's useful to identify where you can intervene to make sure that the system that you have in place for counting alternative care arrangements for children comply with an international standard. Then we run the statistical classification by the expert group on statistical classification that sit within the United Nations Statistical Commission. And the United Nations Statistical Commission is the highest governing body regulating statistics across the world. It sits within the UN system, so include chief statisticians of all countries in the world. There is a core group of members, that rotating members, and then there is an expanded membership that align with the membership to the United Nations. The Statistical Commission has created several task forces. One of these task forces is responsible for international classification. And the development of international classification follows some very strict principles and rules. Statistical classification are the backbone of official statistics. So they are kind of a big deal among statisticians because they provide that much needed clarity on how to count issues or populations in the same way and in a way that is objective and consistent over time and across countries. So we run the statistical classification through the expert group to have an initial review. We pass this review, and then we presented the ICare to the official United Nations Statistical Commission of March of 2026. For statisticians and those work in the field of statistics, it's like presenting the movie at the Oscar. So we made it, and we were able to have the classification endorsed. I just want to take a moment now to acknowledge all the different statistical office and country representatives that participated in the consultation on the alternative care of children. And let me say that the alternative care of children went through this country consultation process in which every single member of the United Nations, every single country that is represented within the United Nations was actually asked whether they wanted to participate. So all the chief statisticians of the world and asked whether they wanted to participate in this country consultation. At first, we didn't know what to expect. We were expecting 20 to 25 countries maximum to be willing to really follow this process and contribute actively to this process. We were overwhelmed to see that more than 40 countries actually joined hands with UNICEF in doing that. And a very diverse set of countries, going from the National Statistical Office of Kazakhstan to the National Statistical Institute of Mozambique to the Ministry of Social Cohesion and Family Affairs of Greece, to the National Statistical Office of Canada. And we are very pleased to see that we have Daphna here today, who has been a big supporter of the ICare and contributed to its development. So just a moment to acknowledge the diversity also of care settings in a way, legislation, systems, customs in place, because this diversity is what make a standard, a global standard that is relevant. So how did we go about developing a definition of alternative care of children? So after long and very intense discussions at times, we were able to land on the following definition of alternative care. Alternative care refers to the care of a child by persons other than the parent or parents, when the parent or parents is or are unable or unwilling to care for the child or abandon or relinquish the child. Alternative care can be formal or informal and can be provided on a short or long-term basis. So you may think that this is a very simple and quick definition. Well, actually, it took us a significant amount of time because every single word in this definition is carefully measured and further defined. So these are the key elements of this definition: care of a child. And think about, we are trying to develop definitions that can be operationalized for measurement purposes. And statisticians really like boxes. Huh? They like to have clear-cut definitions. We don't feel very comfortable with nuances, with gray areas. Yeah? We need to be able to say yes or no. So this child falls into this category, or this child does not. Yeah. So imagine the complexity of then creating a definition that can be translated into a data collection form, whether for a survey or in the context of a registry, right? So we need to ask those key basic information that allow us to say, yes, this child is a child that has a specific care arrangement. Okay, so we had to define what means care of a child. And we thought that others before us, in a way, had defined this subset of concept. And we very soon encounter situations where the concepts were not clearly defined, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes simply because those who developed some of the previous documents were not measurement people. Okay, we're not thinking about these clear-cut boxes the same way in which somebody whose responsibility is to count needs to think about it. So we had to define care of a child, which translate into meeting the child needs, physical needs, cognitive needs, social-emotional needs, plus protecting the child from danger, violence, and exploitation. We had to define, and this was to our biggest surprise, and those of you around, I can see in the audience, we had some of the people who really devoted their expertise and commitment to the alternative care. And I want to acknowledge Roberta Cecchetti, who has been one of the main authors of the classification. Really, we thought that we didn't have to worry about defining who a parent is. Well, actually, we looked and looked and looked, and the definitions that were out there were not really easy from the measurement or clear cut from a measurement perspective. So we had to do a deep dive into also defining some underlying concept. Yeah. So we define what parent is. Also, what it means not to be able to care for a child. Because if we cannot define and specify what it means not to be able to care for a child, then we might be obviously falling into an inability to count clearly the children that are in alternative care. So some of the principles that we had to also use while developing a classification are some basic statistical principles. So for instance, when creating these different definitions and manifestations of care arrangement, we had to be careful to creating these mutually exclusive categories. So we acknowledge that a child might have multiple care arrangements over a lifetime. Okay. Unfortunately, many children actually move between different care arrangements. But we need to be able to count this care arrangement individually, and then this category of care arrangements have to be mutually exclusive. Otherwise, we might be counting twice the same arrangement. Right? So it's a principle that is fundamental for statistical classification. Then the classification also have to be exhaustive in presenting definitions and illustrating manifestation of care arrangements. The classification needs to include all possible alternative care arrangements. And I want to acknowledge that it's not the role of statistician to take a position on what is good or what is bad for a child. Okay? That's something that pertains to our responsibility, but not at the level of counting. It's at the level of setting indicators, monitoring trends, right? That's why we choose what are the things that we care to observe over time and to track. But when it comes to acknowledging diversity of arrangements for the purpose of counting, this very first layer of acknowledgement and counting should be devoid of statements or positions when it comes to what is good and what is bad. What I mean by that is that we know that residential care is in itself detrimental to the child development. And this has been, as mentioned by Shima, proved over and over and over. So a classification that count alternative care arrangement for children also needs to count the care arrangement that might not be the best option for the child, right? Then obviously the classification needs to be comprehensive and exhaustive. And then obviously, once we have this classification, then we develop indicators that allow us to monitor things in the direction of the change we want to see. The last and important principle is the statistical feasibility. We need to develop a classification that can be clear and usable, the country can use, that help country, does not complicate the life of countries, right? That can be used across different data sources, because some countries have well-functioning administrative system, other countries don't. They might have to run surveys. Yeah. And I would say, unfortunately, they will have to run survey because ideally, these are the type of data that come from well-functioning administrative systems where every single child that comes in contact with the system through their care arrangement is recorded and data is stored and used for tracking purposes. Now, the unit of classification of the ICare is obviously another important counting unit is the alternative care arrangements. So we are counting and regulating different care arrangements. Obviously, when you aggregate this different care arrangement on an individual child, then you can use the child to calculate the percentage of children who are in residential care, for instance, or in foster care. But the counting unit is not the child, is the care arrangement. Okay, why? Exactly because one child can have multiple care arrangement and you want to track the different care arrangement the children might be going through. Okay, so this obviously is also done because this allows countries to implement the ICare irrespective of the way the statistical data might be organized and recorded across different sectors. Okay, so it has to be irrespective of the way organization count, but has to help organization count in a standardized manner. Okay, so it's a very important principle of the classification. Now let's look quickly at the structure of the classification. It's a hierarchical classification. So there are three main types of care arrangements. So alternative care that is family-based, residential, and then we have another category for independent living. So there are three homogeneous categories that are aggregated at two levels. Level one, so different caregivers or care settings. And level two, there are subcategories within each one of the level one category. Okay, so under family-based care, we have foster care, kinship care, and other forms. Under residential care, we have care in designated facility and in facility designated for other primary purposes. We also have a residual category. And then for under independent living, we have supported and supervised independent living and supported child-headed households and other forms of independent living. What does the ICare, what does the ICare does not include? Okay, it doesn't regulate care by adoptive parents because the parent is in parental care, so it doesn't apply. It also doesn't regulate situation in which the child is deprived of liberty by decision of the judicial or administrative authority as a result of being alleged or accused of or recognized as having infringed the law. Short-term voluntary arrangement for recreation and leisure. A child living with his mother in a shelter, for instance, or a homeless child. Okay? Of course, we know that once the homeless child becomes eligible for an alternative care and becomes in alternative care, then obviously will be counted. The benefits, of course, we just need to acknowledge that countries will need time to adjust their system in light of these new international standards. The moment there is an international standards, obviously is used and can be used as a standard against which to measure where a country stands. But it's not that the alternative care in itself will solve the issue of data gaps, right? So there is a gradual process of integration of these principles and frameworks into national statistical system. Certain countries might be more ready than others, depends on the level of maturity of the system and also on the resources. So it would be very naive to think that the work now can stop. Now we have a standard, we give it to the country and country will immediately be able to spit out country level data. It requires a lot of more tools that needs to be developed and require country uptake and support. Just think for a second about the international classification of diseases. The very first draft of the international classification of diseases dates back to the 19th century and is still being used. Okay, so we are here for in the long run. So what's next? And I'm going to conclude with that. We have many different pillars to support countries in the uptake of the ICare. So we are preparing the ground for the ICare implementation and use with a number of different accompanying tools. The international classification of diseases, the international classification of violence against children, they have between 20 to over 100 different tools that are needed by country who want to integrate it. So we are working very quickly, very as fast as we could to develop all these accompanying tools, but it's going to take a while. And then, of course, there is the country uptake and integration. So, which requires, again, bringing together partners, using the ICare and the related tools to assess the current state of the system, and then identifying actions, identifying resources, roles and responsibility, and implementing this action plan. So it has to do with, of course, different aspects, the tools, but also capacity building, and equally importantly, resource mobilization, partnerships, and advocacy. And this is where us as data statistician, data people, we need to rely on a broader set of supporters. Because if there is no advocacy, if there is no resource mobilization and partnerships, if there is no push, these tools will remain available online, on in some physical shelves, but it will not make a difference. So data is a shared responsibility. We are doing our part. We develop a tool, develop instruments. Now it's a collective responsibility to make sure that through our advocacy efforts, through our outreach, through our noise, collectively, we can make sure that the available tools are used by country for the purposing of fostering accountability and action. Thank you so much for your patience, and I'm going to give the floor back to Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It's really fantastic to see this launched and all the amazing work that's gone into it. And as you concluded, we need to take this from paper into action. And to help us think through this and reflect on that implementation, we're joined by a fantastic group of panelists. Benedetta Masilo from Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office of the United Kingdom. She's a team leader for education, gender and inclusion research. We have Irina Kihirova, who's the head of Service and Domestic Trade Statistics Department for the National Statistical Committee of the Republic of Belarus. Daphne Cohen, who's a director of the Health Analysis and Modelling Division of Statistics Canada, Enrique Restoy, the director of programs and advocacy for Lumos, and Rebecca Smith, who's the global head of child protection for Save the Children International. So a really broad range of speakers and panelists to be able to reflect on implementation. So let me turn to Benedetta first from FCDO UK, who have been really fantastic champions on children's care reform. So Benedetta, what are the UK's plans on children's care reform, and how do you see the ICare really supporting these?
Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to this. So I'm really excited to be here for this launch because we have been working behind the scene, supporting UNICEF for the past year, and I'm really excited. So we joined and we supported the development and approval of this groundbreaking statistical standard through a program that is called the Data and Evidence to Inform Childcare Reform, which is entirely implemented by UNICEF, that includes the iCare component plus some research. And I would like to take this little opportunity to thank UNICEF for the way they have led this process. As Claudia has just highlighted to you, all this was a very highly consultative, inclusive, well-managed effort that was delivered in a very timely manner and shaped by the active engagement of so many stakeholders in so many countries, including the UK. And the strong level of participation that Claudia mentioned, I think is a clear demonstration of the demand we all have for greater clarity, guidance on how different forms of alternative care are classified. We need this to strengthen our understanding on prevalence, but also on the needs that we have in our own country, and help us also to make better informed decisions and design more effective policy and services for children and their families. We all know how challenging this sector is and how many stakeholders are at play. So having this clear guidance has been really instrumental. But let me take a tiny side step. So as many of you know, I hope, the UK launched its global campaign on childcare reform at UNGA, at the UN General Assembly in 2025, was the Right Honourable David Lammy, current Deputy Prime Minister, but at the time our Foreign Secretary, that really had a commitment, a personal commitment to launch this campaign, bring along with him government, civil society organizations, faith groups, people with lived experience in a global movement that had at its heart one simple ambition, that every child should grow up in a safe, loving and nurturing family environment, free from violence, exploitation and other harmful practices. So to do this, we set up three main objectives under this childcare charter. First of all, to strengthen families and prevent unnecessary separation. The second one is to ensure that where needed, children have access to safe family-based alternative care. And third, to progressively end the institutionalization for children's care globally. We know this cannot be achieved alone, and that's why the UK decided to take a leading role, but be a partner amongst others to build this global alliance for children care reform. And as part of this effort, the Charter calls for leaders to uphold the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, to invest in family, in children, all children, especially those with disability, who tend to be disproportionately placed in institutions, but also caregiver and inclusive service to end violence against children and this harmful practice, such as orphanage tourism. I'm pleased to say today that over 37 countries and 150 organizations have already signed the Charter. A huge thank you to you all for believing in this, working together, and we always welcome more countries to join. And we offer technical assistance to the signatory of the Charter if they are interested to further develop or reform their approaches in childcare. This is a free technical assistance that FCDO provides to signatories. Beyond this, FCDO has also established an international children and young people task force to ensure that the voices of those with lived experience inform everything we do and make sure that they keep us online with our commitments, so we are accountable to them. And we continue to build international awareness and political will through high-level events, through research outputs and knowledge sharing. And we're very grateful to UNICEF and other colleagues for the wonderful partnership in this initiative. I think I will stop here, but there's also how do we feel the ICare is supporting the UK plan? Is that the right time to say about this?
Yes,
Rachel?
Benedetta, maybe in 1 minute, if you can summarize, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Okay. So what we wanted to make sure was that this charter and the activity that all governments are taking to reform the system and to deliver was through good data and good evidence. And that's why we've supported the ICare process, because we want to deepen the global understanding of what is the evidence and help government and partners to know exactly what is the prevalence, what are the needs. So ICare provides us all with a common framework and share metrics that enable the charter signatory and us all to establish baseline, identifying gaps and better assess needs. Crucially, it helps government and service provider make more informed decisions about where scarce resources are most needed, improving the targeting of investment, helping ensure children, parents, and caregivers receive the support they need and the services. Having a shared metric will also provide useful starting point for academics and researchers to form new partnerships to deliver comparative cross-country analysis, building, of course, on decades of trailblazing works. So we look forward to UNICEF Pet-Friendly Workshop, conference dissemination, working across with statistical agencies, with offices, with service providers to make these new standards used, implemented, and fully embedded in national service and policymaker. Ultimately, having this harmonized global system standard will be a game changer in both our understanding of the issues and in our ability to tackle it together. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And once again, a huge thank you for FCDO for really championing this issue, investing in this issue, and bringing us all together as well to drive it forward. Let me turn over to Irina now from the National Statistical Committee in Belarus to really hear your reflections now as how you see the ICare as being helpful in Belarus to strengthen and harmonize data on alternative care, and giving you the floor for 3 to 4 minutes, Irina. Thank you.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Национальный статистический комитет Республики Беларусь высоко ценит работу, проведенную Детским фондом ООН ЮНИСЕФ по разработке и утверждению международной классификации видов альтернативного ухода за детьми. Накопленный опыт ведения государственной статистики подтверждает тот факт, что применение международных стандартных статистических классификаций является фундаментальной потребностью для любой статистической системы. Международные стандартные классификации основаны на согласованных концепциях и принципах, разработанных в рамках международного сотрудничества с учетом передовых практик и опыта. Одобрение ICare на 57-й сессии Статистической комиссии ООН стало важным шагом в укреплении глобальных статистических стандартов в области статистики о детях. Белстат признателен за предоставленную возможность принять участие в пилоте при разработке проекта ICare. Данное мероприятие имело для нас высокую практическую значимость в обмене опытом и знаниями в области альтернативного ухода за детьми. В ходе участия в пилоте Белстатом была проделана масштабная работа по привлечению к участию в заполнении экспериментального вопросника по проекту статистической классификации всех заинтересованных государственных органов, поставщиков административных данных о детях на альтернативном уходе. Это было Министерство образования Республики Беларусь, Министерство здравоохранения, Министерство труда и социальной защиты. Каждый из поставщиков данных в рамках своей компетенции провел экспертный анализ предложенных определений, основных форм альтернативного устройства детей, уровней дезагрегации, оценил доступность данных и согласованность с национальными определениями. Белстат, выступая координатором процесса мониторинга положения детей, обобщил позиции госорганов и представил заполненную анкету в адрес ЮНИСЕФ. Основные результаты и выводы были представлены на консультациях экспертов в рамках тестирования пилотного проекта. Проведенная работа позволила сделать вывод, что определение форм альтернативного ухода в Беларуси не выходит за рамки концепций и определений, установленных международной классификацией ICare. В республике выстроена надежная система сбора данных о детях, находящихся на всех формах альтернативного ухода, обеспечивается необходимый уровень дезагрегации данных для принятия управленческих решений. Имплементация разработанного стандарта ICare в национальную статистическую систему Республики Беларусь предоставляет возможность оптимизировать национальные потоки административных данных об альтернативном уходе за детьми от различных поставщиков, позволяет выстроить их в единую структуру новой классификации, обеспечить единый уровень дезагрегации данных. Но данная работа должна проводиться в тесном взаимодействии с поставщиками и при безусловной поддержке ЮНИСЕФ. Только общие усилия позволят повысить уровень международной сопоставимости показателей альтернативного ухода за детьми. Уверена, что сегодняшнее мероприятие послужит дальнейшему укреплению международного сотрудничества в сфере статистики о детях. Спасибо за внимание. Еще раз спасибо за возможность принять участие и сделать свой отзыв о работе, проделанной работе.
Thank you so much, Irina, for being part of this process and being spearheading implementation and also highlighting how ICare and can really enhance the work that is already going ahead by national statistical committees and commissions. So thanks ever so much, Irina. I'm going to turn over to Daphne now from Statistics Canada. To share with us really the main findings from the ongoing work of the Conference of European Statisticians in relation to the data on alternative care. And again, how do you see ICare contributing to this ongoing work?
Thank you very much for inviting me today. The main finding from the work of the United Nations Conference of European Statisticians was actually quite striking. Among the most vulnerable groups of children that we examined, children with disabilities, children experiencing violence, and children in alternative care, statistics on children in alternative care were by far the least developed internationally. As part of the UNEC task force established in 2020, experts from national statistical offices, including Canada, as well as organizations such as UNICEF, OECD, Eurostat, and UNECE spent 2 years reviewing the state of child and youth statistics. The resulting guidance endorsed in 2022 highlighted a significant information gap when it comes to children in alternative care. Why does this gap exist? This was alluded to in the comments made by Claudia. First, children in alternative care have largely been absent from major international monitoring frameworks. If a population isn't included in global reporting systems, there's often no expectation to measure it consistently. Second, much of the data collected by national statistical organizations comes from household surveys. Children living in institutional or other forms of alternative care are often missed by those approaches. While administrative data can help fill the gap, those systems are usually designed to meet national or local program needs and aren't often comparable across countries. Third, there is enormous variation in alternative care systems themselves. Countries define and organize family-based care, residential care, and other arrangements differently. Even within Canada, approaches vary across jurisdictions, and as a result, data might exist, but it's often describing different things. And that brings us to what I believe is the most important finding. You cannot achieve international comparability without common definitions, common terminology, and common standards. If everyone is counting something different, then the numbers aren't comparable. And that's exactly where the ICare initiative makes such an important contribution. One of the key recommendations from the UNEC guidance was that countries should develop and adopt standardized definitions and classifications for alternative care, including the major categories of family-based and residential care. The ICare classification framework directly addresses that recommendation by providing a shared vocabulary and a common statistical framework that countries can use. In my opinion, ICare is helping to create the foundation that has been missing. It gives us a common language for describing children in alternative care and a basis for producing comparable statistics across countries. And maybe I could just end with a very simple point. If you can't count it, you can't talk about it. And if you can't talk about it, you can't develop effective policies to address it. ICare is helping ensure that children in alternative care are finally visible in the data and therefore visible in policy discussions. I'd like to congratulate the ICare team and everyone who was involved in this very big accomplishment.
Thanks so much, Daphne. And as you said, it's a powerful tool to make children who often are invisible, visible and supported and protected. Thanks so much for sharing. Let me go to Enrique now from Lumos to really reflect on this role of civil society in supporting countries to take up, use, integrate ICare in their national statistical systems. As Claudia says, we need collaboration to get this into the government system. So Enrique, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Rachel, and congratulations to UNICEF and all partners for this. This is really huge for civil society as well, as you said. We know civil society is a critical partner in the implementation of the national systems of care. So therefore, the classification is also concerns civil society enormously. The question is, how civil society can promote the classification. But first of all, it's obviously through the advocacy and the engagement that civil society has with governments, but not only with governments, also with those who finance systems of care. Having a classification really helps have the same message, the same make sure that civil society can be together in what seems can be quite complex in terms of explaining why children should be in care in families and not in institutions. It's also very important to note that because civil society is contributing to systems of care, obviously this is a huge tool for us to be able to know how we're contributing, to measure our success in working alongside governments, or I would say with governments, more than alongside governments, to make sure that the system really changes and to measure that success. But I would just like to say that if I can, just for a couple of minutes, there's very, very many reasons why a civil society will want to not only to promote the classification, but also to make sure that we use it ourselves. First of all, I would like to say that having a classification of this nature, which has been lacking in the sector for so long, contributes to the global momentum that exists around moving towards alternative care that is family-based. It offers a platform to have a homogeneous sense across countries of where we're going together in terms of the reforms. So the countries don't really feel isolated. They don't really feel that they are not doing, that they're taking steps outside the steps that others are taking as well. I think it's important to note as well that the using ICare and advocating for it will also reinforce the complementarity of civil society's role in the systems of care, the transformations of systems of care, and just to make sure that their contribution is well measured, and with that is well also acknowledged and by governments and other actors. It will also help target the collaboration among civil society organizations themselves. Having a common classification also unifies our own approaches. And that, as many of us know, has been lacking as well. So were we talking about the same things? If we don't talk about the same things, it's very difficult to be together and to work in a way that you are reinforcing each other. So lots of reasons to engage, lots of reasons to use, not only to promote, and a huge landmark in our work. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Enrique. As you say, we're stronger when we collaborate, and this area of work needs huge efforts and huge collaboration. So with that, let me turn over to Rebecca from Save the Children to reflect on how ICare can be used effectively, but this time from the perspective of being leveraged by civil society to really drive forward those care reform efforts.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So as part of Transforming Children's Care Collaborative, which brings together diverse stakeholders from civil society organization and other actors around the world advancing care reform, Save the Children was really excited to be part of this reference group and contribute to ICare because we know how important that data is to track the progress in the reduction of institutionalization and the types of informal and formal care that are being utilized. And as Claudia explained, it was a very complex process. Having standardized terminology can look very different in different contexts. And we're really pleased to see how ICare promotes consistency while also encouraging those complex contextual discussions at the national level. So it's important for a shared understanding between government and civil society. And we're also very pleased to see that the implementation of ICare not only improves data on residential care, but also all forms of alternative care, including extended family care placements, which is something that we know kinship care is one of the principal forms of alternative care globally and is often not captured. And we believe that governments will be able to then more comprehensively oversee the types of care being provided in the country and work together with civil society and faith actors to identify challenges, better regulate, provide technical support, and oversee progress in deinstitutionalization, particularly because many residential care facilities are still privately run. We think that civil society plays an incredibly important role in the dissemination and implementation of ICare through supporting care reform at the country level, ensuring ICare is adopted as a key national tool and strengthen the data and evidence on children in alternative care, and also contributing to its use in humanitarian settings potentially, and working with government authorities at the local levels along with service providers. We also believe there's a lot of momentum and opportunities through the Global Care Campaign on children's care, which the UK government just mentioned, because countries are now making national commitments supported by civil society actors on strengthening their data systems. And we hope that this will also include the adoption of ICare. We think it will provide more clarity on the types of care and also help us to work together in identifying the differences across the country, which will help in our planning, understanding the root causes for family separation, and better targeting appropriate resources and response. So thank you.
Rebecca, thank you so much. We've reached the top of the hour, so unfortunately there's not time for Q&A, but I see that Claudia and others have been responding to the questions that have come in the chat. So with that, let me just thank everyone for attending today. Clearly, there's a huge interest in this. Thank you also to Shima and Claudia, to the panelists Benedetta, Irina, Daphne, Enrique, and Rebecca. It's clear that this is a landmark, and it's a really welcome landmark in the care reform agenda. There's no doubt that this can enhance data collection, it can support advocacy, it can bring together different partners around a common tool. It can support monitoring progress and monitoring the impact of investment. And critically, as we heard from a number of speakers, it can make those children who have remained invisible for so long visible. And by doing so, contribute to every child growing up in a safe and protective family environment. Thank you, everyone. We really look forward to collaborating with you on implementation.